So I would like to turn this over to our PACOM rep, Ross Rowley. All right, Ross, well, I'm on your first slide, so just tell me anytime you need to advance, and I will do so.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Paul came up to PACOM in August, and we gave him a brief on S.P.I.D.E.R.S and our cyber skills, and he really liked the message, so that's sort of the genesis behind it. Go to the next slide, Paul. Before I talk about the actual metrics that we use, I wanted to give everyone an understanding of what S.P.I.D.E.R.S is. It's a JCT, as Paul mentioned. Here you can see the four main goals within the JCT. We build that slide, Paul, and you can see a red circle around the first one. Protect past critical assets, loss of property, cyber attack. We established these four goals very quickly on, more than 5 years ago, and they've held steady throughout this process. But chief among them is the cyber defense system. Go to the next slide, please. This shows a quick summary of a crawl, walk, run approach, 3 different phases. It starts with rural victim and targeting and completed there, actually, where we did a first level demonstration on a system that protected the past, the water treatment plant. We took 2 generators, moved them together with some solar resources, added a smart control system, and that was the crawl portion in phase 1 of Pearl Hickam. That was done almost 2 years ago. Last year at Fort Carson, we took 2 megawatts of renewables along a district of past critical assets in the middle of the post there and brought all those generation assets together into one piece, added in vehicle to grid as energy storage, and that was completed a year ago. And then phase 3 is in progress. It's out at Camp Smith, Hawaii, where I work at Pacific Command headquarters. They broke ground last month. They had the fencing up, the construction fence up. We're going to add 4 new generators. It's going to be the first installation-wide microgrid in DoD. And at the end of the project, by the time this is commissioned in May of 2015, this system will provide 25 times more reliability. It will provide a monetary benefit through Hawaiian Electric Company. It'll be cyber defended, and it'll be the first installation-wide microgrid in the Department of Defense. Oh, and it'll also extend the life of our ability to use backup power from currently 72 hours to weeks because of various efficiencies gained by installing the microgrid. So build that slide, Paul, and you can see one of the things we've done all along the way is cybersecurity best practices along the bottom, along with red teaming in each phase. And build again, you can see phase 1, we actually started cyber red teaming before the JCTD kicked off. If you're familiar with the Aurora threat, which was proven at Idaho National Lab, that was where some experimenters were able to remotely disable a generator, a backup generator, make it self-destruct in a simulated cyber attack. So we went to the National SCADA test bed at Idaho National Lab to prove some theories that we've been establishing at PACOM on command and control networks to see if they worked on an industrial control system, on a SCADA system. And sure enough, they did. So that set our path to a series of red team and cyber events. Go to the next slide. I'm now on slide 4. This is a timeline of the various cyber events that we had, 10 of them in total, starting with that one at Idaho National Lab. Then we did a vulnerability assessment at Pearl Harbor on the live microgrid. We did our second lab experiment at Sandia about 2 years ago. And this is going to be sort of the test case I'll use in a minute to show you how we developed the metric. Then we took that information from Sandia National Lab and we duplicated it at the live microgrid in Joint Base Pearl Hickam. And it was the first ever live red team attack on a real microgrid in DoD history. And then in the next phase at Fort Carson, we did another vulnerability assessment conducted by PNNL, Pacific Northwest National Lab. We went back to the lab to do a red team experiment at the S.P.I.D.E.R.S Industrial, what's it called? Intelligent Power and Energy Research Corporation. They were the smart microgrid control system for all three phases of S.P.I.D.E.R.S. They had the lab, so we did hardware in the loop experimentation in that event, followed that up by an actual live microgrid experiment at Fort Carson. And then upcoming, we're going to have another vulnerability assessment at Camp Smith done by PNNL. Lab experiment has already sort of happened last week or 2 weeks ago at Sandia National Lab, the J-Basics Joint Test, which stands for Joint-Based Architecture Security for Industrial Control Systems. We partnered with them. They took some S.P.I.D.E.R.S microgrid components. They put it in the lab at Sandia. They attacked it with NSA Red Team and Sandia Red Team folks and folks from the cyber flag exercise. And their purpose is to develop CONOPS and CPP for defending industrial control system across the DoD. And then we're going to have another cyber event out at Camp Smith when the entire thing is commissioned. So going back to that Sandia Red Team, we came out of the Idaho lab experiment realizing that this is a really tough problem, to do a red team attack and try and come up with some meaningful metrics to compare the different configurations, the different runs of a system. And so some smart engineers at PACOM came up with the idea that you can see on slide 5 of developing a scoring table. The scoring table is based on a common principle of confidentiality, integrity, and availability that the communications world uses to describe the criticality of their system. So confidentiality means that if a red team is able to see the data passing through the network, then confidentiality is compromised. If they're able to change the content of the data passing through the network, then the integrity is compromised. And if they're able to restrict the data flowing through the network, then availability is compromised. So for the given system that we developed in the lab at Sandia, we took all the various communication paths and assigned a value, an importance to each one of those paths, and also assigned either a read-write notation to it to determine how we might be able to compare these things. And on the left is the network. You can see in there, sort of 3 simple enclaves. And on the right is the scoring table with the 3 various combinations of paths. Human-machine interface, client to the server, from the HMI server to the front-end processor, and front-end processor to the remote terminal unit. Each of those data exchanges were scored according to confidentiality, integrity, and availability for both read and write. And so the example yielded the results on page 6, if you go to that page. And you can see very easily, if you consider the ability of a network to withstand red team attacks, you can compare a compliant network with a non-compliant network. There on the first 2 lines, both of them were flat. They were not enclaved. And then the next 6 lines were all enclave networks of various types, either compliant, non-compliant, or medium, low, or high access. And you can see as you get more sophisticated, as you add enclaving, as you make sure the network is compliant, as you make sure that the red team attackers only have very low access into the network, your network becomes more and more resilient to red team attacks. So this proved to be a pretty valuable tool for us. We then took it to the S.P.I.D.E.R.S lab in Boulder, Colorado. We repeated some elements of this. We added some other. We did whitelisting. We did throttling. We also had enclaving and access. And we used the CIA scoring system again. And at this point, let me point out some of the limitations, one of which we observed in Boulder at the S.P.I.D.E.R.S lab. And that is when a red team is able to affect some amount of damage, not really damage, if they're able to take the microgrid down, there are different levels of down. So even though you score it the same way, that the red team was successful in availability of the system, for instance, there are levels of success. So we need to account for those various levels of success. Maybe the microgrid was only down for a split second and then reformed itself and everything was hunky-dory, or if the down was down for 30 minutes and you had to completely reboot everything. So if we, and when we do this again, we're going to add another element to it, and that is the severity of the effect. And then the other key limitation, I think, is the size of the network. You did see at the Sandia network, if you go back to page 4, I think it was, or 5, let me find it. Yeah, page 5, the Sandia network is pretty simple. And everything we do on the microgrid, same thing at S.P.I.D.E.R.S and at the Fort Carson and Joint Base Pearl Hickam S.P.I.D.E.R.S microgrid, very simple. So you can easily enumerate all the various data paths and monitor them to find out the CIA scores. If you get into a grid scale system like the Hawaiian Electric Company, which is one of the experiments we're getting ready to launch with the DARPA as the sponsor, then things are going to be problematic. So the the combinatorics of large numbers will take over, and it will be impossible to monitor and score every single data path in that network. So that pretty much concludes my presentation. I'm open for any questions at this point.
Okay, outstanding. Now, Ross, we're going to throw you to the lions here. We've got a couple of statisticians, and we're going to talk about how you generated your patterns for your vulnerability assessments, both post and prior, and ask some further questions about your next work with DARPA and Hawaiian Electric as well.
Okay.
I am interested in seeing how you're generating standards that would be used in commercial industry. Okay, so I'm going to see if we have any questions, particularly from Kenrick. Give Kenrick the microphone over there. And yes, I am.
Hi, I can barely hear you.
Okay. Okay. Oh, we have one other question in the back. Go right ahead.
I was wondering if you could explain a little more your read-write scoring, and I think it was from the red team perspective, but if you could just give a little more background on that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we actually did the read-write distinction in the S.P.I.D.E.R.S lab experiment because they all turned out to be the same thing. The read, and were you able to read the data traffic, or were you able to write over the data traffic? That was sort of the distinction between those two columns. But it turns out that the effects by the red team were the same, regardless of whether it was a read or write privilege.
Okay, then I have a question for you, Ross, and that is Hawaiian Electric and DARPA. Can you give us more information on what you're doing there and what role any of the metrics you have developed will be playing?
Sure. We decided we're going to go beyond spiders, and we're doing this in 3 ways. We're going beyond the enclaving and access and compliance, and we're going to look at other types of devices like heuristic sensors, moving target defenses, and advanced intrusion detection systems. It's my feeling going to these various conferences, and especially the Industrial Control System Joint Working Group, which is DHS's premier cyber defensive industrial control system conference. I go to that twice a year. The whole genesis of the state of defense. When I first started going 3 or 4 years ago, they were focused on the threat. You know, the sky is falling. We've got Stuxnet and Dooku and Aurora and all these other threats out there, and there's nothing we can do about it, really. Well, then they started coming up with mitigation techniques, and now they're starting to provide some visualization and awareness tools to give the network owners the understanding of when they're attacked. Right now, it's pretty much a no-holds-barred Wild West situation with, I don't want to say no one manning the store, but very little ability to detect any attackers. So that's what we're going to do with TECO, is sort of look at that awareness piece of it. That's number one. And the other way we're going to be different than spiders in this upcoming set of experiments is that we're going to go outside the fence line, the DoD fence line, to include our partner in the utility industry, Hawaiian Electric Company. And this is a bold move. It's a public-private partnership that, frankly, I'm really impressed and pleased and a little bit surprised that Hawaiian Electric would agree to do this. But they have said, come on to our, not dormant power plants, they're actually working power plants that they don't use at the moment. Come onto those systems, set up your red team, set up your devices, and we will partner with you because we want to lock down our systems as much as you guys do in DoD. So that's a good sign from my view. And then the third way, this is going to be different from S.P.I.D.E.R.S experimentations. We're going beyond electric grids. We're going to do another experiment with Hawaiian Electric Company on their grid, but then the next follow-on to that will be oil and gas pipelines. Each of these are going to be emulated at Pacific Northwest National Lab on the National SCADA test bed. A little bit of hardware in the loop there, and then we'll repeat those experiments on the live either electric grid or oil and gas pipeline at ECO or perhaps NAVSAT. So that's the plan there. As far as the metrics go, we're just in the early stages of developing the baseline data at HECO, and we have not set up the actual test experiment yet and how we're going to do the metrics for this one. But I'm sure it's going to include CIA scoring system of some means. We'll also have false negative, false positive for the intrusion detection systems and heuristic sensors.
Okay, outstanding. And you did bring to mind one last question since you brought up industrial control systems and SCADA. Any thoughts on black energy?
Black energy, define that for me.
Okay, that's one of the latest exploits that was announced, I guess, last week. I'll send you that information. Just curious to see if...
well, that's a good point. One of the beautiful things about heuristic sensors is that they're machine learning sensors. You can train them to be able to detect zero-day threats. That's sort of the beauty of heuristic sensors. And so a new threat like black energy that comes along, if you train it properly, it will detect it because it's so abnormal compared to the normal traffic you get.
Okay, well, we'll be waiting to hear more from you regarding your next effort. Now, has that effort with DARPA and Hawaiian Electric kicked off yet, and what is the title of it?
The actual title is called P3SIC, Public-Private Partnership for the Securing of Industrial Control Systems. So public-private partnership is the P3 part, and SIC, Securing Industrial Control Systems, SICS.
Okay, and that is...
We had a kickoff meeting to determine the name and sort of go through some of the management type of elements yet, but the actual project itself is not kicked off yet. It'll be FY15 funding. When we get the funding, then we can kick off the project.
Outstanding. Well, I'll hope to get out again and see how progress is being made on that. Thanks very much.
I look forward to hosting